He grinned while announcing the death of my career, right in front of the Christmas tree in front of a cheese platter and lukewarm Chardonnay. Your role's been automated, darling, darling, like I was some 1950s housewife clinging to a typewriter while the men played visionary. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just reached into my purse, pulled out my government-issued compliance badge, the one with the embedded chip and serial number tied to every federal validation chain we had, and set it on his glass desk like a poker chip at the end of a very quiet, very dangerous game. Make sure you register the serial with Treasury, I said. Then I walked out. I know, hell of an opener. But trust me, it gets worse before it gets interesting. By the way, if you've made it this far and you're one of the 90% of folks listening without hitting subscribe or tapping that like button, do me a favor, make that your good deed for the day. It helps more than you know, and the team here, we run on caffeine, sarcasm, and that little thumbs up. Thanks. Now, back to the mess. 3 weeks earlier, I was still invisible, and that was by design. I'd been at Westridge Systems for a decade, nestled quietly behind walls of government compliance, tax documentation, subcontractor procurement flowcharts, and enough federal acronyms to make a grown auditor weep. Nobody ever noticed when things went right, and that suited me fine. I wasn't there to be popular. I was there so the IRS didn't parachute into our lives with clipboards and subpoenas. And up until the day that man-child COO strolled in with his shiny loafers and LinkedIn swagger, I thought we had a decent rhythm. My name's Nicole, by the way. I used to be the compliance officer of record for 6 jurisdictions, 3 overlapping vendor pipelines, and all of Westridge's government-adjacent contracts. Used to be, because the new golden boy decided he could replace me with a SAW platform he didn't understand and an overenthusiastic intern named Bryce. It started like all disasters do, quietly, with meetings I wasn't invited to. I noticed he'd been taking automation vendor calls behind closed doors. Slack channels I had access to suddenly had permissions revoked. He kept referring to my documentation process as bloated, like federal compliance was a Word doc you could just summarize with bullet points and a Canva infographic. First red flag, he asked if we could fast-track 1,099 verifications without wet signatures. I told him federal audits weren't a TikTok trend, and he laughed like I was joking. I wasn't. Second red flag, he called our Treasury portal ancient and tried syncing it with a third-party tool without verifying whether the token keys were revocable. Spoiler, they weren't. But hey, I kept my mouth shut. You don't get to a decade in compliance by screaming every time someone waves a shiny object. You watch, you take notes, you document, and I documented everything. He strutted around like he was Moses parting red tape. Called meetings sprints. Used phrases like horizontal scalability and compliance light. When I reminded him that we couldn't legally process payments without a validated badge chain, he told me, Nicole, we're in a new era. If you can't evolve, you'll get left behind. Left behind. That's what I was thinking about during the holiday party, and he stood on a makeshift stage next to a cardboard Santa and toasted the future of lean operations. He said, and I quote, "We're sunsetting redundant roles. Efficiency starts with letting go." Someone laughed, someone else clapped. HR sipped spiked cider and looked at their shoes. I didn't wait for the rest of the speech. I walked up, placed my badge on the corner of his desk with the calm of a woman who's watched empires fall under lighter hands, and said nothing but that one sentence about registering the serial. No one asked what I meant. That was their first mistake. They had no idea what that badge was tied to. No idea what systems it authenticated, what validations it carried, what signatures it triggered. They just saw a piece of plastic and a salary line. And that, my friends, was their second mistake, because I wasn't just the compliance officer. I was the system, and without me, they were already on fire. They just didn't know it yet. There was shrimp cocktails sweating under heat lamps, a Spotify playlist no one could agree on, and the hollow clink of plastic champagne flutes against forced smiles. Holiday cheer via corporate budget. I was by the wall, my usual post, half listening to the VP of Ops drone about Q1 velocity metrics, when the room fell quiet. The new COO, Travis, God help us, had taken the mic. He adjusted his collar like a game show host and smiled that toothy, overeager grin that always looked like it came with an NFT collection. Before we dive into desserts, I've got an exciting announcement, he said, clapping his hands like a youth pastor with a branding deck. As part of our new automation initiative, we'll be phasing out redundant legacy roles. I blinked. Legacy roles was how Silicon Valley dressed up the phrase "you're fired," and suddenly every person over 35 in that room was very aware of their step count and proximity to the exits. But then he said it. Compliance will be fully automated by January. Nicole's been instrumental, but we're streamlining. He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked through me, like I was already gone. Like I'd been a warm placeholder until ChatGPT and a Zapier plugin could slap an audit sticker on a quarterly report. My fingers were around a cup of flat cider, and for a second I thought I might throw it. Not at him, just into the void. Maybe at the banner that read "One Team, One Future." But I didn't. Instead, I turned, walked out of the party like I was heading to the bathroom, and took the elevator to the 11th floor executive suite. His desk was unlocked. Of course it was. Travis believed in open culture and trust-centered access, also known as I've never been audited in my life. I placed my compliance badge right on top of a printout labeled Q1 Expense Optimization. It looked stupid there, a hard rectangle of federal plastic next to his budget fantasy. Then I leaned in just enough to whisper, "Make sure you register the serial with Treasury." That badge had my name, my clearance code, and the cryptographic fingerprint that authenticated every secure access key from 2015 onward. Without it, without me, our 1,099 verifications, subcontractor audits, and procurement chains didn't just stall, they collapsed. But Travis didn't ask what I meant. He didn't even notice I was gone until someone asked who was handling vendor onboarding the next day. At the party, they passed around mini cheesecakes. HR clapped. The CEO raised a toast and said to innovation. I walked out the front door. No cardboard box, no goodbye email, no dramatic scene. Just my coat, my silence, and a knowledge deep in my bones that the clock had started ticking. Not for me, for them. By the time the glitter settled and the New Year's hangovers wore off, that badge would be the ghost in the machine. A little plastic time bomb with a Treasury-verified timer. Travis thought he'd streamlined the company. What he'd really done was cut the brake lines and smiled for the camera. And I wasn't about to warn him. Let the man find out the hard way that you don't replace a firewall with a filter app and a motivational quote. As for me, I had already placed a call, not to a recruiter, to someone who actually knew what that badge meant. Someone with capital, clients, and a very strong dislike for incompetence dressed as disruption. Let them toast to progress. They had no idea they'd just fired the one person who kept the IRS at bay with a smile and a signature. The only automation coming was the chaos I'd designed to unfold exactly on schedule. Monday came and my inbox didn't even flinch. No "we'll miss you," no reply all drama, no flood of sad gifs or emoji hearts, just silence. Which, to be fair, was exactly how I'd left it. No farewell email. No calendar invite titled Nicole's transition lunch. Not even a pity cupcake from facilities. HR did send out a memo. 4 sentences, probably copy-pasted from a template written in 2014. We thank Nicole for her service and wish her the best in her future endeavors. No mention of 10 years of audit-free quarters. No nod to the federal vendor relationships I nurtured like houseplants. No hint that half the company's government-adjacent revenue streams had once run through me like a spinal cord no one liked to acknowledge. It was like being erased by default, but I didn't take it personally. I took it strategically. I wasn't gone. I had simply shifted surfaces. That Tuesday, I walked into a small office tucked inside an unassuming building 2 blocks away, rented under an LLC I'd incorporated 6 months earlier, because sometimes you smell the rot long before the foundation cracks. I'd named it Anchor Comm Solutions. Sounded safe, sounded boring, sounded like exactly the kind of consultancy a Fortune 500 firm would hire when their compliance team suddenly became a bullet point in a mass layoff deck. By Wednesday, I had 3 folders open. Federal validation frameworks by jurisdiction. My archive SOPs from Westridge scrubbed clean of proprietary flags. A signed letter of intent from a former vendor client. We're interested in retainer-based advisory support pending Q1. That former vendor client? One of our largest subcontractors. The kind Travis had never bothered to meet. The kind who preferred working with humans who answered the phone, not bots that spit out PDFs and 30-minute response lags. Their head of compliance, Sharon, had called me personally the night of the holiday party. I heard what happened, she said. I didn't ask how. People talk. If you go independent, she added, we'd like first dibs. I said nothing. Just made a little check mark in my mental notebook. Planning, not plotting. Meanwhile, back at Westridge, Travis had taken the reins with all the grace of a golden retriever driving a forklift. He rolled out a new compliance automation suite called Firmlytic, a platform that promised zero-touch governance. God help us. Its pitch deck featured animated graphs and a photo of someone who looked suspiciously like Ryan Gosling, holding a clipboard in a server room. I fed my documentation into the machine like sacrificial lambs, expecting miracles. And for a few days, it looked like it worked. Reports auto-generated, dashboards lit up. Vendors got digital signatures on time. HR even posted a Slack update. Q1 compliance report, first draft complete, go bots. I watched it all from my quiet little office with one sad spider plant and the hum of a second-hand Keurig. Here's the thing about compliance. It doesn't fail loudly. It fails politely. It lets you believe everything's fine until the day the IRS sends you an email titled Urgent Discrepancy Notification. Until the day a vendor flags your validation chain as expired. Until Treasury locks your portal for missing human validator signature. And that's not a theory. That's a clock. And Travis had no idea his started ticking the moment I placed that badge on his desk. So no, I wasn't angry. Anger is for people who want apologies. I wanted receipts. I wanted timed triggers and automatic escalations. I wanted the systems I built to fail not catastrophically, but accurately. Like a timed fire drill that exposes who read the manual and who thought the alarm was a suggestion. And above all, I wanted silence. The kind of silence that made them wonder what I took with me. The kind that would make Travis's eye twitch every time someone said the word audit. AnchorCom wasn't just a backup plan, it was the plan. And they'd handed me its launch on a silver platter with a pink slip tucked under the shrimp cocktail. Let them think they'd moved on. The truth, they'd just moved out of compliance, of control, of time, and I was just getting started. January 2nd came in like a thief with clean shoes. No bang, no flash, no parade of consequence. Just fluorescent lighting, stale coffee, and a 6:03 a.m. email that cracked the spine of Westridge Systems without even raising a voice. The subject line read, breach of authorized validation chain badge hash 447C3 of the sender, a very sober branch of the IRS. The recipient, one extremely undercaffeinated CFO named Richard Crane. Richard was many things, a numbers guy, a stress chewer, a man who still printed emails to feel them in his hands, but he was not stupid. He read the subject line 3 times, heart creeping into his throat by the third. Badge hash 447C3A. He knew that number. Everyone in finance did. That was my badge. The one I'd placed on Travis's desk like a grenade missing its pin. He opened the email. No pleasantries, no soft landing. Just one line. Validation protocol tied to credential 447C3A, expired with no recorded transfer. Compliance status, flagged. Then came the attached audit log, pages of cascading red entries showing every failed handshake between their automated platform and the Treasury's credential servers. The bot had tried to push through subcontractor filings using credentials it didn't possess. The validation handshake failed at the certificate level, which meant, well, it meant the whole system was flagged for spoofing. Fraud adjacent, to the untrained eye, just a tech hiccup, to anyone in federal compliance, a breach, a real one. Richard put his coffee down, left it to go cold. He didn't call Travis, not yet. He just sat there staring at that badge number, my number, and realized the shiny new compliance platform Travis installed hadn't ported over my identity credentials. Because you can't. They're person-bound. Issued to individuals, not titles, not departments, not bots. He scrolled further. The second email hit at 6:11 a.m., automated filings submitted without active human validator signature. Action required, audit flag escalation pending. It wasn't just a formality, they were already escalating. The problem wasn't that the filings had failed. The problem was that they had gone through, pushed by a system Travis swore was bulletproof. Signed digitally, using a cached credential string that no longer existed, which meant every file that passed since January 1st was now tainted. Every vendor 1099, every W-9 verification, every procurement record routed through that system now had a crack running straight through it. And that badge, the one I left behind, it wasn't a souvenir, it was a trapdoor. Back at Westridge, nobody knew any of this. Travis was in the gym, probably posting a sweaty selfie with a hashtag about crushing Q1. The CEO was boarding a plane to Aspen for his annual vision retreat. Legal was still on holiday skeleton crew. And HR? HR was still gloating about the AI rollout. Richard stared at the screen and didn't move. He'd been through downturns, misfilings, even an SEC brush-up back in '09. But this wasn't sloppy bookkeeping or a missed deadline. This was the removal of the one person who was the system, without any effort to understand what she held, what I held. He clicked back into the portal, tried to override the filings manually. Blocked, no clearance. The system still thought I was in charge because in the eyes of the federal government, I was. Even gone, I was still the key holder. The platform Travis had installed, it wasn't certified, it wasn't validated, it wasn't me. Richard stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at a city that didn't yet know a corporate implosion was unfolding inside a high-rise on 7th and Main. The badge number burned into his brain. 447C3A. Tick, tick. The first meeting of the new year started late and ended with someone vomiting in the restroom. At 8:07 a.m., Legal joined the call expecting a routine quarterly filing sync. 5 minutes in, they hit a wall. Treasury Portal rejected every submission attempt with a cold, consistent error. Unauthorized entity, credential verification failure. They thought it was a login issue. They reset passwords, tried backup accounts. They pinged IT, who opened a support ticket and said they'd circle back. Meanwhile, the filings continued to bounce like dead checks off a locked vault. By 8:32 a.m., they realized something was wrong with the credential anchor itself, which, for the non-fluent, meant the system had no verified human to pin anything to. Nicole's badge had been the credential anchor, and she was gone. Richard, the CFO, leaned forward in his chair like a man watching his own obituary scroll across a teleprompter. He looked at Travis, who was hunched casually at the other end of the conference table, slurping a green smoothie and browsing something on his phone. Probably LinkedIn. Probably a post about change agents and disruption. Travis, Richard said slowly, did you migrate the badge protocol when you rolled out the new platform? Travis didn't look up. The what? The federal credential bindings, badge-level validations, the access registry attached to Nicole's ID. Travis blinked. Dude, it's just paperwork. We automated the whole thing. Paperwork? Yeah, her files are all in the cloud. It's not 1997. The platform pulls her formatting logic and outputs the quarterly drafts. It's seamless. We even kept her old folder structure. Smart, right? Smart. Richard stared at him. You kept her folder structure. The platform used her data. It just didn't have her credentials. And now that those credentials had lapsed with her termination and hadn't been properly transferred, revoked, or revalidated, the whole system looked like it was impersonating a federal agent, because that's what it was. The automation suite had been generating government filings using cache strings from a terminated badge ID. The same ID now marked as inactive with unreported transition in the Treasury portal. In federal terms, that's a misrepresentation. In legal terms, that's a breach. In practical terms, that's a very expensive disaster. Richard stood up abruptly, walked into the adjoining executive suite, and opened the drawer of Travis's desk. There it was, the badge. Still sitting there, government-issued, serialed, heat-printed laminate. 447C3A. It hadn't been lost, it hadn't been deactivated. It had just been left there like a forgotten credit card in a hotel room. Only this one could take down a corporation. He picked it up, held it between two fingers like it might be radioactive. Nicole hadn't stormed out. She hadn't made demands or left in a blaze of righteous fury. She just put it there, deliberately, like a sealed envelope marked open in case of stupidity. Travis peeked into the room, brow furrowed. Dude, what's the big deal? Richard didn't answer. He just walked back into the conference room, badge in hand. The legal team had gone pale. The portal was still throwing errors. IT had nothing. Treasury had stopped responding. They weren't just locked out. They were flagged because Nicole hadn't just left the building. She'd left the building perfectly. She hadn't deleted files or sabotaged anything. She'd followed protocol. Her credentials expired exactly on time. No transfers, no violations, no notes left behind. Just a single line to Travis, make sure you register the serial with Treasury. And he hadn't, because why would he? It was just a badge, just paperwork, just the human keystone of the entire compliance chain. The kind of thing you don't notice until it's gone and the system starts to rot from the inside. Richard looked down at the badge. This wasn't an oversight, this was surgical. She didn't forget to file a handoff. She filed nothing, because she knew they wouldn't look until it was too late, and now it was. By noon, the interns were whispering in the hallway. By 1:15, Accounts Payable had a whiteboard full of flagged entries and a director of procurement holding back tears in the break room. Vendor payments, every last one of them, had screeched to a halt, not because the money wasn't there, not because someone missed a button, because the compliance filters Nicole had written into the vendor pipeline years ago, line by line, clause by clause, were now rejecting every transaction without a valid badge chain. And Nicole's badge chain? Gone. Revoked. Lapsed, not replaced. Travis had told everyone the new automation platform was compliance adjacent. Like that meant anything. Like the Treasury Department would shrug a missing human validator and say, close enough. By 2:40 p.m., the subcontractor 1099s were bouncing. Not flagged for formatting issues, flagged for authorization failure. The system Nicole built was designed to be idiot-proof, not idiot-immune. It didn't care that Travis had found a flashy new interface. It only cared that the person behind the credentials no longer existed in its system. Westridge had over 300 active contractors. Every single one of them was now technically out of compliance because the person authorized to verify their tax forms had, in the government's eyes, disappeared. And then came the real body blow. At 3:12 p.m., a federal partner, one of Westridge's largest, sent a formal notice, operational pause effective immediately pending resolution of compliance irregularities, all activity suspended. Just like that, a pipeline worth $38 million annually was frozen. No escalation call, no second chances, just paused because the badge protocols didn't just gate internal systems. They were baked into every vendor agreement, every federal MOU, every quarterly assurance form. Nicole was the assurance. Now, without her, they were flying blind through a thunderstorm with a torn-out dashboard and a CEO still skiing in Aspen. At 3:45 p.m., the board called an emergency meeting. Attendance was mandatory. No dial-ins, no excuses. Everyone was in the room except the CEO, who was unreachable somewhere in the mountains, blissfully unaware that the company he bragged about at every investor dinner was now leaking compliance violations like a gut-shot deer. Travis arrived 5 minutes late, phone in hand, still convinced this was a systems issue or a temporary portal hiccup. He sat down, opened his laptop, and fired off a Slack message to IT, circle back when it clears up. Might be a certificate issue. Richard didn't speak. He just placed Nicole's badge in the center of the table. Silence, not reverent silence, scared silence. The kind that only happens when smart people realize they've been stupid in a very expensive way. A board member, Janine from Legal Oversight, finally leaned forward. What else is tied to her? That's when the real panic started, because nobody knew. Nicole had been efficient to the point of invisibility. Her systems didn't broadcast. They hummed quietly in the background, validating, checking, auto-alerting, syncing across departments with eerie precision. Her protocols weren't loud. They were absolute. You didn't need to see her for things to run. You just needed her to exist. And now, like a ghost in the code, her absence was triggering failure after failure. By 4:10 p.m., facilities pinged legal asking why the contractor renewals were returning error flags. By 4:16 p.m., Treasury rejected another batch of quarterly documents. The message this time: signature mismatch. Assigned validator retired with no transition record. System marked at risk. At 4:19, HR tried to re-onboard Nicole's badge as a temp validator. The portal spat it back out like spoiled milk. Credential 447C3A was already marked as inactive with no delegation filed. Reactivating it now would require full recertification. 5-10 business days minimum. They didn't have 5 days. They barely had 5 hours. Because now, every department that had once quietly relied on Nicole's signature was finding out the hard way just how many invisible threads she'd been holding. And Travis? Travis sat there blinking, finally understanding that the badge he'd dismissed as just a plastic card had been the key to the kingdom. Nicole hadn't just left. She'd surgically removed herself. And the body was just now realizing which artery she'd taken with her. Badge sat in the middle of the boardroom table like a live wire. No one wanted to touch it. No one wanted to look at it. The room was too bright, those cold, clinical LED panels humming overhead like they knew what was coming. Phones face down, water bottles untouched. A tray of untouched pastries growing stale on the credenza while the entire executive team tried not to blink. Richard, the CFO, stood with his back to the window, jaw clenched tight. His laptop, just moments ago alive with portal error logs, vendor rejection notices, and the Treasury's most recent warning, now sat closed beside him, a tombstone for the day's optimism. He didn't speak right away. He slammed the laptop shut, the crack of plasticon wood making 3 people flinch. Then finally he picked up the badge, held it in the air between 2 fingers, turned to Travis. "You did this?" It wasn't a question. It was a death sentence disguised as 5 syllables. Travis, still leaning back in his chair like this was some overblown IT drama, grinned, actually grinned. He spread his hands like a magician post trick. Proudly he said. The room didn't breathe. Richard looked at him for a long time, then, slowly like something sacred, walked the badge over to the head of the table, where the CEO had just returned, face red from altitude, jacket still dusted with aspen snow. Without a word, Richard slid the badge across the polished walnut. It stopped with a soft tap. "You need to understand something," Richard said, his voice quieter now. Flat, cold. "As of 9 a.m. this morning, we are in breach." The CEO's mouth opened. "Nothing came out. We've lost credential validation. Treasury's locked our portal. We've been flagged for impersonation filings. Half our vendors are frozen, and our largest federal partner has suspended all operations." Still, no one moved. "I've spent the last 5 hours trying to find a workaround. There isn't one." Janine from legal cleared her throat, barely. There's always a workaround." Richard didn't even turn, not when the anchor credential is terminated without reassignment, not when you fire your federal compliance officer of record and don't tell the government. The badge gleamed under the light, that stupid little rectangle no one had cared about until it took down an entire corporate structure. The CEO stared at it like it might bite him. "She left this," he said finally. Richard nodded. "She placed it on Travis's desk and told him to register the serial." Everyone looked at Travis. He just shrugged. "It's a badge. It's not like it had a kill switch." Richard's voice was barely above a whisper now. It was the switch. That silence again. The kind that stretches out, thin and taut like a piano wire. The kind that follows a moment so stupid, so irreversible that even breath feels inappropriate. In the far corner, someone's phone vibrated. No one checked it. The CEO leaned back slowly. He didn't speak. He didn't need to because now it was sinking in. Nicole hadn't yelled. Nicole hadn't sabotaged. Nicole hadn't stolen a thing. She just walked out, left her badge, and let the system run exactly the way it was supposed to. And the system? It was built to fail safe in the absence of verified human credentials. Not fast, not loud, just final. They hadn't just fired a person. They'd severed the artery that kept the company from bleeding out, and the bleeding had already begun. By 8:17 the next morning, the fallout had its own inbox folder. Subject: Immediate Contract Suspension, Department of Energy. Subject: Notice of Compliance, Audit, Treasury Division. Subject: 72-hour response required, Office of Federal Procurement Policy. Subject: Inquiry, Nicole L. Adams, badge credential 447C3A. Each email was more precise than the last. Cold, surgical. No emojis, no apologies, no misunderstandings. Just language like scalpels. Credential mismatch. Non-compliant protocol. Unauthorized transition. The government wasn't asking questions. The government was already moving. By noon, 5 federal contracts were placed under immediate review. 2 were frozen outright, including the $38 million pipeline Nicole had anchored with a signature every quarter like clockwork. Westridge's one-sprout government arm was now a spreadsheet of red cells and pending audits. Inside the compliance queue, filings submitted on January 1st were being flagged not for formatting, but for fraudulent authorization. Because the automation platform, gleaming and colorful as it was, had never been certified for human offloaded compliance. Not even close. Travis had installed it like a home printer, checked a few boxes, ran a sandbox test, and called it operational. But compliance is not a sandbox. Compliance is a minefield. Nicole had marked every step with quiet precision, until the moment she walked out and left the map behind. Travis tried spinning the story, said the platform had transitional bugs, that internal handoff procedures were still catching up with innovation, that Nicole had been non-collaborative. Didn't matter, because while he fumbled through a damage control Slack thread, the Office of Inspector General began poking around. Investors lit up with questions. Two major subcontractors terminated their retainers by close of business, and one of the board's most vocal allies, a defense procurement partner, pulled out of a pending expansion deal. All for one reason: the person holding the keys wasn't on payroll anymore. And worse, no one had told the regulators. Meanwhile, across town, Nicole sat in a sunlit office surrounded by muted blue walls and the soft sound of a bubbling Keurig. No chaos, no alarms, just her laptop, and a fifth contract on her desk, this one bearing the logo of her former employer's largest federal partner. Their legal team had emailed her directly. Subject line: Transition of Compliance Advisory Services, immediate onboarding. They didn't ask for quote. They sent the contract already signed. Nicole flipped to the final page, scanned the terms, and clicked accept. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. This wasn't revenge. This was a realignment. She'd been the system. Now she was the service. The name on the badge had changed, but the signature on the filings, still hers. A junior associate walked in carrying a fresh stack of vendor forms and paused when he saw her. You want these scanned or hard-copied? Nicole looked up, blinked slowly. Digital only, she said, and verify the credential chain before submission. He nodded, already impressed, already learning. Back at Westridge, the boardroom was a war zone of whiteboards, flagged reports, and mute buttons. Travis was nowhere to be seen. Rumor had it he'd taken personal leave pending review. Richard had aged 5 years in a day, and legal was trying to draft retroactive justification memos that no one would ever believe. The badge was still sitting in a plastic sleeve at the center of the table. No one dared move it, because moving it would mean taking ownership. And no one wanted that. Nicole didn't need to watch the fire. She'd already read the manual, marked the exits, and walked out before the first spark. Let them choke on the smoke. She had work to do. At 9:43 a.m., the final nail hit with all the grace of a government sledgehammer. Subject: Formal breach notification IRS case file, #2890GH7 attached were 37 pages of audit triggers, protocol failures, and the kind of language that made CFOs go pale and compliance officers wish for early retirement. Validation chain terminated without successor. Credential mismatch in active filings across Q1. No formal notification of compliance officer transition submitted to Federal Registry. Audit exposure, 6 jurisdictions. 6. It wasn't just a red flag. It was a full-blown compliance hemorrhage. Westridge wasn't facing a slap on the wrist. They were staring down a regulatory abyss. Inside the boardroom, the walls had stopped vibrating with panic. The chaos had evolved into something quieter, colder. Everyone was still, hunched forward, lips tight, eyes darting to each other like they were trapped in a sinking lifeboat and someone had just spotted the first dorsal fin. The CEO sat at the head of the table, reading the IRS notice like it might spontaneously combust. He finally looked up and whispered, How did this happen?" No one answered at first. Then Janine, the senior partner from legal, broke the silence with a voice so low it barely reached the other side of the table. She was our compliance officer of record. The CEO blinked. We know that. No, she leaned forward. She was the named validator on every federal form, every quarter, every vendor profile, Treasury, Defense, Procurement, even Health and Human Services. She was it. He sat back, his mouth parting slightly as if he could physically feel the blood draining from his face. And her departure, Janine continued, was never filed. Silence. She let it hang. Then, which, under Section 11A of the Federal Contractor Agreement, is misrepresentation. Misrepresentation. The kind that triggers automatic audit flags. The kind that breaches not just protocol, but trust. The kind that makes you radioactive to anyone holding a government checkbook. Across the room, someone whispered what everyone was thinking. She didn't just leave, she erased herself. No ceremony, no smoke, just precision. They didn't replace her because they didn't understand what she was. And now the system she built was rejecting them like a body rejecting a bad transplant. Somewhere around 10:15, the CEO asked, half choking, "Can we get her back?" The answer was already on its way. Across town, Nicole sat at her desk, the quiet hum of the space humming around her like a secret only she knew. She wasn't watching news alerts. She wasn't reading Westridge's desperate PR spin. She wasn't scrolling through LinkedIn for Schadenfreude. She was working. 3 new vendors onboarded that week. One multi-year contract from a firm that had pulled its account from Westridge not 48 hours earlier. The numbers were better than she expected. The referrals, immediate. People knew who she was now, not because she made noise, but because she never needed to. A knock at the door. A courier stood in the hallway with a thin manila envelope and a signature form. She signed it, thanked him, and closed the door. The envelope was unmarked. She opened it. Inside was a badge, not hers, a new one. Serialed, laminated, freshly issued. It bore her name, her firm, and something else. Designation, Authorized Federal Compliance Validator Level Roman 4, multi-entity, 4 new vendors. All approved, all certified, and her former employer replaced. She didn't smile, there was no need, because this wasn't about revenge. This was about recognition. She hadn't yelled, she hadn't hacked, she hadn't burned a thing, she handed them the badge. And the IRS did the rest. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.